Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third Author Happy Hour, brought to you by the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. I'm Sarah Woods, the director of the Kentucky Book Festival, and I'm so glad you've joined us this evening. We'll continue with these virtual Author Happy Hours every Thursday at 7 p.m. through the end of October as part of our virtual book festival. You can register in advance for these webinars at kyhumanities.org or join us live on Facebook each week. I think we might be having issues with Facebook right now, but we will add the video tomorrow if we can't connect tonight. Follow us at KY Humanities on our social media feeds, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates about the book festival. We've got our full schedule and author lineup up at kyhumanities.org if you want to check that out. If you have questions as we move through the panel tonight, you can add them to the Q&A box and we'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. For now, I've got 4 special guests with me tonight, and I hope you'll grab your beverage of choice and get ready for another excellent author a happy hour. Author Jeremy D. Paden is a poet and professor at Transylvania University and a faculty member in Spalding University's low residency MFA program. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
Caroline Randall Williams is a multi-genre writer and educator in Nashville, Tennessee. She's the writer in residence at Vanderbilt University as well. And she's the co-author of the YA novel, The Diary of B.B. Bright. She's the author of the NAACP Image Award-winning cookbook, Soul Food Love. Thank you for being with us, Caroline.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we've got Leatha Kendrick, who's the recipient of 2 Al Smith Fellowships and the Sally Bingham Award. Her 5th collection of poems is titled And Luckier. Hi, Leatha.
Hey, good to see you.
And our moderator for the evening, Nana Lampton, is a lifelong resident of Louisville. She's the current chairman of Heart Scuffle Inc., and she is a poet and a painter. She lives on a farm in Goshen, Kentucky. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Nana, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for putting everything together. I've brought you a beautiful little bunch of asters from the fields of Kentucky. And they are for the sake of refugees. They are for the sake of our Black lives. They are for people sick with the pandemic. And they're for poets. They're for people whose houses have burned. So I present them to you as the poets who hurl their words against walls, and we hope they fly through the crevices. So tonight, I'd like to begin by reading a poem, and I'll start with my friend Leatha, who stayed in a little cabin on my farm at one point to finish a book. And she's written a poem called The Measure, Consider the Measure of a Step. I'll read just 2 of these pieces. 3 feet at a time, the world slips past, every meter earned. The weight of flesh and bone, our first burden. To get anywhere, an act of patience, a job of work. In the 4th part, even refugees carrying the nothing they still own, carrying death in their sweat, death haloing everything, can cross the measure of entire countries in days with no home on the other end, no vision of gardens, but mud and tents waiting, and stasis and fences erected to protect the dream from them. So, Leatha, would you tell us a little bit about your thinking of limits that we discussed?
Well, this book that I wrote has turned out to be about limits in lots of different kinds of ways, but like happens so often when we're working on something, we don't know what it is until we see what we've written. We might think we're headed in one direction and end up in a very different place. And taking on something like what I tried to take on in the measure of a step, consider the measure of a step, I had to come up against my limits of what I had and had not experienced. And as I read Jeremy's book and as I've read Caroline's book, I see how this is what poetry does. It's what Keats was talking about with negative capability. We don't know something because we've experienced it. We know it because we leap across that gap, and we can live in that place of not knowing everything, and which indeed honors the mystery of another life that we cannot know. And if we can speak out of that place with our aware of our limitations and not denying our limitations, not appropriating somebody else's life, but speaking out of the compassion of an imaginative engagement with another person's life. I was listening to a podcast on radical imagination from the New Yorker the other day, and had Terrence Hayes and Tracy K. Smith and Marilyn Nelson and Kevin Young, and they were talking. Terrence Hayes said something that really hit me. He says, you know, you kind of have to figure out how to let all this stuff that's happening just end up being part of what you're doing. Because sometimes when we're writing poetry, we want to be in that place where we're shielded somehow. And Marilyn Nelson used that word, shield, that her poems could be a shield sometimes against all that's happening. But ultimately, when we're writing and we reach that limit of self, we have to leap across it and take on the experience of the world and try to translate it as best we can. So that's what I kept coming up against in a lot of the poems. A lot of times they were very, you know, they were my personal limitations of aging and failure and all those other things that we confront as we go through life. But on a bigger scale, they're the world's limitations that we keep coming up against.
As we have these huge forces coming in against us, it's hard to imagine a California fire taking everything. It's hard to imagine the trip that Jeremy describes in this wonderful new book. And it's called Under the Ocelot Sun, illustrated by Annalise. And I thought I'd read two small pieces here so that you could expand on it. And I'd like to read something from Broken Tulips, which was your previous book. We've brought you to this waiting place, this arid land of rattlers and coyotes, to this wall. Precious things are worth 1,000-mile walk. Mija, they are worth hunger and risk. And this other piece is, and treasures, Mija, are worth dying for. If that means those treasures are given the chance to live. Mija, we are a people who find a way, a people who survive. Mija, we are people of the corn, part of the ancients. I hope we are too. And just one little piece here that I like so much called Honey and Wormwood. Poems are not timeless, but bound to the millstone of time and cast into the sea. What will become of all these songs once the blind, mute angel descends and eats our book, sweet to the tongue, but bitter to the belly? I think you can just launch into those, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, when we had talked earlier, we talked a little bit about that first or that second poem about poems being bound to time, and it's that rootedness, I think, that that lets them then move forward and continue to speak to us. And when, you know, Leatha was talking about coming up against her limits, time is the supreme limit, really, for all of us, and it in part is what we struggle with and wrestle with and try to understand. And I think for poets, well, for me, there's this question of history and the movement of history. And there are times in which history seems much too large and much too vast to try to get to, but the way that we get to it is through the individual stories and through these small, more domestic stories. And my own personal story is one that is deeply bound to the borderlands of this country, the southern borderlands of this country, not the least of which because both of my parents are from Texas. My mother, though, is half Puerto Rican, and but she grew up in Texas, and because of that, though never learned to speak Spanish because her mother didn't want her children to experience that feeling of difference and the feeling of otherness that would have happened had her kids grown up speaking English in the way that inflected with the way that she herself did. Yet we, as a family, learned Spanish later on when we moved to Nicaragua and Costa Rica as children. So I grew up in Latin America, in Central America, and in the Dominican Republic. And knew close family friends who made this trek north in the 80s, and found ways. But they made the trek north in the 80s and established themselves here in the US and were given amnesty under the Reagan administration. And yet here we are trying to, as a nation that is, trying to exclude them, when in fact the very operation of our nation depends on their labor. No one, if any of us have eaten any vegetable today, we have eaten the fruit of the labor of people that have come across the southern border. And it's that story, it's the story of grit and survival that is, I guess, what I'm trying to get to.
And I remember you're referring to Cortez and how he came in and it was a demolishment of an ancient civilization. That's what it comes from. That's why poems need to be kept in stone, I think. And it's so hard to realize that there's always been a troubled stream of people from that part. And I was brought a little piece of Neruda, which I'll read later on because I know you're interested in that. So we'll make this round. And Caroline, I'm so happy to see your face because I feel as if this book has taken care of a lifelong of lust for me, and which I've experienced greatly. And I'm very proud to have a book of Lucy, whom Shakespeare loved, and we know he did. We know, there's no question, he must have loved her. And the idea of darkness, how he explored darkness and how darkness is the mother, the great mother. And that incredible thing that the prison was the background to the brothel that Lucy ran. So let's see, it's the darkness, but I wanted to read what the Shakespeare quote. He says, "Then will I swear that beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack." I mean, it's the introduction to the book, and I absolutely agree. I might read Comeback Spirit, and then I'll turn everyone loose. The snow, dark, the peace, whispering, and yes, went the comeback spirit once. Love, it went, the comeback spirit once. Sharecropped, the heart when dreaming can end so ghostly. Yes, went the comeback spirit. Yes, I will remain with them, what conjured me. This is what I think both Letha and Jeremy are talking about. It's our imagination that is such a powerful thing that we can conjure the people who lived in Cortez time or in Stonehenge or in fields sharecropping or Lucy, who was the madam of a brothel who looked after the most intelligent men who could come. Shakespeare. Go ahead.
Gosh. Okay. Well, I think my first thought, I'm sort of mortified that this is my first thing to say after, but I guess what happens when you live in Mississippi for 5 years, but you quote Faulkner. But when he says that the past is never dead, it's not even past.
Yes.
I think, when you say, can we, and it's wild. I don't think I've ever read that poem out loud outside of workshop, and I don't, and nobody's ever asked me about it. I'm really moved that you picked it. I love that poem. It's a weird little darling of mine that I haven't killed.
It's so true. That's what we're doing, is bringing the spirits of the people who, I mean, for me, the people who are marching up from Venezuela and who get stopped and have nothing to eat and their families are split has dominated my life here in Kentucky. It's just the strangest thing. I don't have any real connection, but Lucy is myself. Lucy is the one who is coming into the light. So I don't know if you've been able to read that, Lucy, Leatha.
Yes. Oh my, it's stunning.
Strong.
Thank you. Well, I think that it makes me, it's so happy to me to hear you say that. The dedication to the book is to all my ladies, real or imagined, whose darkness, real or imagined, ever wanted for a voice. I mean, I think that we experience darkness in so many different ways, and you talked about, darkness as the mother, the idea there's darkness inside the vessel, right? And I think there's mysteries there, and there's miracle there, and you talk about Jeremy talking about, we can't eat a vegetable without somebody's hands having been on it, that we can't remember, that we haven't named. And I think there are just so many ways of examining, redressing, healing from erasure.
Yes.
And I think something about reclaiming the dark, like reclaiming the vessel, there's a poem in there called Sublimating Lucy, Imagining Courbet or something. And it's about, Loisien du Monde, his poem that's essentially, the view of the prostitute from the good parts up, as she's reclining on the bed. And he's like, it's the beginning of the world. Yeah. The endless vessel is the beginning of the world. And you think about sort of the elemental condition of that, and how we have to find the power in that. I remember I wrote that poem because I was sitting at the Square Books. I was sitting at the balcony of Square Books, if any of you have ever been to Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. And I was saying, well, where is the power in the receptacle? And I thought it's the cannon, that it's the actual, not the ball, but the actual cannon is the power of the receptacle, a black hole, a well, right? There is endless power in the idea of being a vessel, being not a void, but a certain kind of potent emptiness that's
And think how Picasso used everything.
That. Oh God.
Think how Picasso used that. The Picasso understood exactly what you're saying. There was,
well, and I think he in so many ways he was so intensely, in some ways, a supporter of the fortified feminine, I guess is the best way I can say that.
Yes.
But I think about this question of, I sort of had the opposite reaction to my fellow panelists of what to do with grappling with this other narrative and of reclaiming somebody else's story and making it smaller. I mean, I understand very much the urge to make it intimate so that you can get close to it. But for me, my reach was actually to like just grab Shakespeare and say he was mine.
Yeah.
Like, I think there was something there, and I think that there are two ways, and I think that part of that for me comes from, and I hope you'll forgive me if I'm misunderstanding a perspective position, but for me, coming from, like, all of you on the panel are white presenting, at least, right?
I know that.
And I think for me, when you are other, the radical gesture is claiming the front, right? And I think that, so for me, that was sort of where I came into the space from, was saying, I'm going to look at this and see myself there. I'm going to look at this canon and color it by identifying my own presence in it, I think. And I think then, and so the work is just different, but it's a complement, it's a yin and yang.
The other thing is,
coin, really.
Lucy was the object of Shakespeare's greatest desire. So that is an elevating, that's an elevation.
Yeah.
So there is the answer. That's the answer of the poet, to change the identity.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, and what's funny to me is, people say, I said, it depends on the panel, it depends on the audience, but I mean, I'm happy to answer for my book in any space, but, people say, well, why do you need Shakespeare's approval for your beauty and your blackness, right? And I say, well, and to me that, and it's a valid question, trying to shake a gaze that doesn't choose you is a valid undertaking. But to me, part of it is, Shakespeare is canon. Shakespeare's already been approved of by everyone. And so when you come into like a conservative space and say, oh, by the way, Shakespeare's already been talking about my beauty, about this aesthetic value system, and you've already let him in, you've already approved of this doctrine. It's sort of a Trojan horse to me. And so it makes me feel, and so to me, that's sort of the value of it. It's not really a question of needing to be validated looking backward, but thinking about the ways that his value gives purchase moving into the future, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I've been helping with Black Lives Matter here and getting the banners up in Jefferson Square. It's been such a wonderful hand in hand of working together. So I'm very, very attuned and sensitive to the point of tears over what's been happening right here in Louisville. So it's happening every day. It's shifting and moving, and we need a higher figure. Higher figures are helpful. So for the mother part, I'm going to read my poem and not really discuss. And then Leatha, would you continue on with maybe reading another and talking some more? So I'll just read this quickly. We had the mother before the weapons came is the title. We had the mother for millions of years. She minded early blossoms, apples, and almonds, protected children in the season of storms when black winds pursued people and animals across the land. Generally benevolent, she shaped the rounded pears, united man and woman, blessed the maypole adorned with flowers, displayed young beauties dancing in a circle, weaving ribbons in and out from the central tree. When men from mountains rode fast through plantings, they stood in a stirrup, holding the bows steady. Their arrows went straight to the heart. Growers gathered to build a dome for their grain, stood on walls to shoot the attackers, changed everything. They traded the mother for a warlike god. Call the men, glorify the man, give him a fierce countenance. Women were sacrificed. Droughts, winds, thirst, and sorrow drove people from the land. Oh, how the trees mourned, their hidden power ignored. as the feminine petrified inside them. From the water source, the mother waits. So that is my offering to the, and Jeremy, it does not exclude you. So Leatha, go ahead.
Well, there's different directions. There's so much that's been raised already. And I think Caroline taking hold of something that's already approved and infusing it with what was latent there, you know, what was already there, but not seen or articulated yet is so important. And it's really a lot of what we do. Poetry is paying attention to things. And once you've paid attention to something and you've gotten your imagination around something like who Lucy really probably was, then you're free to inhabit that. And inhabiting it, you can enlarge our sense of who Shakespeare was, of how the world is and how it was back then, that we might never have confronted or even imagined before. I think that in my poems in this book, I kind of go back and forth between the registers of the large and historic and scientific, because some of these poems have to do with the fact of that everything is made of the same molecules, basically. I guess I could read that poem. I could read the one about heaven. Is this a heaven? I think maybe I will. I'll go ahead and read that one because it's a totally different kind of a take on things. It's a take on how much can we really claim in terms of who we are and how we divide ourselves. It's called What Does a Heaven Require? And so it takes it, again, the leap across from a known intimate life into an imagined larger historic life. What does a heaven require? 1, could this be the afterlife our ancestors dreamed? After all, our flesh is nothing more than the soil they tilled, the molecules of air they breathed, reassembled. What matter are we but theirs? If the sum of this material world holds true from the origin, nothing created or destroyed, everything moving from form to form, we are an afterlife. 2, what does this heaven ask of us? Ours, freedom from want, some of us enjoy. Surely these are Eden's longed for ease, a paradise most on this planet can't conceive or claim. And hell's alive here. In prisons we erect and skyless cells, the fix we have to have, no decent place we can't afford to house ourselves. Still, some of us choose to live what looks like salvation, locked away in gated enclaves, bank accounts among our own kind. 3, listen. Every living multicellular being, every complex thing arose only after single cells embraced the alien mitochondria, making this poem, as well as cave art, chariots, bubblegum, spiked heels, Buicks, possible. A mesh of us and not us. We're each a little cosmos. What is the gut, even now, but upset, bereft of its essential microbes? We sing our brief chemical chorus, cellular, transient, superior in no way to the planet's least particle.
I certainly share those feelings.
That's kind of one way to grab something big and make it into, I hope, something intimate enough that we can experience it bodily a little bit, which I think also is what poetry can do for us. Put us in another place.
Cosmic dust. Jeremy, do you have comments? Or you all keep this going round?
Well, I have to just say, really, I'm leaping in just for 30 seconds to say what a glorious list. With bubblegum and Buicks, and I mean, I can't even, that's my rule is when I teach students, I'm like, make your lists unexpected. Yeah. They have to have unexpected elements that, you know, break the mind open when you try and put them together because they are like the others. When you say the initial thought is one of these is not like the others, but they are. And then the work is how, right? But I love a good list. So I wanted to celebrate that.
Thank you. It was fun to do.
Well, I think this connects up. I think what I will do, I don't have much to say, but I thought I would read some from the beginning.
Yes.
We were talking a little bit about earlier with your poem, Nana, about mothers, and I wanted to, if you can see it,
Abuela.
because her illustrations are glorious.
Oh, they are.
Anelisa Hermosilla did an absolutely lovely job, and so the beginning of this goes, "We are people of the corn, mija. We grind it on metates, soak it in cal, and grind it down to masa for tortillas. In the morning, we drink its milk warmed with cacao, vainilla, and canela. People of the corn make their home in the forest," Abuela would say, "where quetzal and cotinga sing, near rivers and streams that leap free. At night, the jaguar guards their sleep. When I tell quetzal and jaguar stories, I tell you things Abuela told me as a child." And yes, there you see a lovely jaguar sleeping over a girl. And I guess connected to the writing of poems and to the telling of stories and to the telling of stories in new ways, right? We tell stories to know who we are, and we tell stories to understand the world about us, and we tell stories to shift power relations.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we do. We write poems to understand where we are and what we're doing, and we write poems to respond to the powers that be. And in part, I think that is an impulse that runs through all of the poems that we've shared thus far on this panel.
You know, I don't know how you all feel, but I assume it's pretty much the same, that in this time of dissension, we're facing such tremendous forces of destruction that all we can do is write poems. All that we can possibly do is to launch some microbial or molecular and wonderfully imaginative word somewhere into something, because it seems so powerless at the moment. Caroline, you don't look powerless. You look as if you have power in yourself, and it's such a marvelous thing. It has been difficult for me to kind of see those people walking from Ecuador with children and their grandparents. When my leg hurts when I walk too long, you know, they hurt. And that they get there and find a wall. So the only thing they can do is to talk about where they came from in the ancient days, what means something to them, what the stories are. And I can't tell you how, because I live alone on a farm, and I have for 34 years, and Leatha knows it well, but it haunts me to think that we haven't done more to invite. And of course, it involves slavery and fields and what we all came from. And we have to own that. So there's so many huge forces that I have to concentrate on how to heal, and I talk to trees. That's essentially it. But I didn't mean to stop you.
Well, and I think
Jeremy.
stories is part of it, and I think food is also part of it.
Yes.
And stories happen over food. and food comes to us through stories as well. So the storytelling tradition and food culture go hand in hand, and they're part of the same
They are.
thing that is in fact culture and civilization.
That's what I love about your soul food book, that it reclaims this, story and brings it and affirms it, the story with food.
Since March, I've been growing 2 vegetable gardens. And so I haven't gone to the store for vegetables in a long time. And I've been cooking from many cookbooks, Middle Eastern, Mexican, everything. It's been the best thing in the world too. And that means you enter in. Caroline, go ahead. I know you're waiting.
No, I love a conversation. This is great. It's COVID. We're all a little lonely. It's a little isolated.
Yeah.
This is amazing. I'm sitting. These are all my grandmother's cookbooks behind me, and the shelves extend that way and that way. I give a talk about how a recipe and a poem mostly do the same exact thing. It's just one is feeding one part of your body and one is feeding another, but you're really just trying to impart the information in a way that allows somebody to create sustenance for themselves. I think that, the food tells so many stories. And I think, and then the intersection of that and the truth of, what's happening in the border with people trying to find their way into this country. And I had an opportunity to speak at a big immigration convention that Nashville hosted a couple of years ago. And I talked about, there's something really unsettling, despite the fact that one journey is a kind of choice, although it's still a fleeing from something hard to something else. There's something voluntary about it. And the color in my body comes from forced migration, but the limitations of how the colored people on either side of that journey experience the failures of American hospitality, and the shortcomings of the democratic American, of the dream. They come from the same place. And I think that that's something that we're reckoning with now. I mean, we can't let in we can't open up because of what we dragged in the first place, or what we dragged in and what we won't let in now are the same thing. And we really just have to deal with, a certain kind of toxic whiteness. It's the simplest way to put that.
And
yeah.
What I see is that it's been stolen. The original ideas have been stolen as if they were now in the hands of the despot. So.
But I think I'm going to push back on that a tiny bit and say the original ideas were written by a man who owned his own children.
Exactly.
So the ideas were a failure. I mean, they were not real in the first place. They were a fantasy.
They were French ideas that came here anyway.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, you're quite right. And I understand that. But even so, in the most ideal, if there were an ideal way of thinking about them, they've been hijacked.
I think that's right.
And a small, rough bunch.
Yeah. And I think that the danger, the crazy gift we have right now is to embrace the fact that, I think that it's important. And again, my work is always about reframing. So I can't help myself. I think that part of how we heal is by letting go of the idea that they were hijacked and accept they never were and hope for them to one day be. Because I think that the idea that we somehow lost it is how people get away with saying "Make America Great Again."
It's being created.
We're working to hold the words to the idea that they could have been, that they never actually were meant to be in the first place. Yeah. And I think that and just letting go of the idea that it ever was is actually freeing. And it allows us to work toward it without feeling so hopeless or nostalgic in a way that like can be hamstringing. And I think that that's sort of where my like heart lies with it, because I used to cry, you know, reading the Declaration of Independence every 4th of July until I read Frederick Douglass's speech. And I was like, right, never mind.
I'm reading that
right?
Bible.
You know? And then, but then you still think, you know, like my grandfather's grandfather was born a slave in Maryland and escaped slavery to join the Union Army. And all of the men on that side of my father's family have served in, you know, for the federal government subsequently. And because of the idea, then, you know, but the idea is still just an idea. Like it's never been functional. And I think it's sort of
so
like
young.
Da Vinci's flying machine, you know?
We're so young. We haven't even started yet. We're just creating it, don't you think? I mean, we're just barely 2 centuries and 3 centuries. It's just nothing compared to what you're talking about, Jeremy, what the real heritage of people is. And I couldn't own a farm in the founders' ideas. I couldn't borrow money. I couldn't have anything in my name. So those things have changed.
We are young. We're young. I think I mean, I'm going to read a poem.
Good.
I'm going to read a poem. I'll save my political commentary for later / when I'm talking to news heads. All right, this poem's called Black Loose. And I will say, when I was doing my research for this book, I got the opportunity to go and work with a gentleman called Duncan Salkeld in the University of Chichester. And you know, all of the prison records for the Bridewell prison, they begin with some version of the words, "This exeat saith that." And exeat is just sort of a truncated version of the word examinate, which is like the examining body, the intake guys who, you know, so the constable brings in some wrongdoer and sets them in front of the examinate, and the examinate says, well, what have you done? And then, or what did he do? And then the account of the transgressions is made, and then the examinate writes down, this examinate saith that so-and-so did such and such a thing. So I have made up some of my own in this book, but then I also reproduce a couple of the original prison records. And this poem includes one of the original prison records. So Black Loose. 1, early research. Of lives burning still in salvaged books, all entries begin the same way. This exeat saith that. 2, primary documents. And this exeat saith that Black Loose is a vile bawd, and liveth by it. And East and his wife and she agree together and divide the money that is given to the harlots, and help to trim them up with sweet water and calls and coats and things fit for the degree of them that use them. From the Bridewell Prison Records, Volume 1. 3, later records. My exeat saith that if Black Loose, alias Batham, alias Luce Bainham, alias Lucy Negro, alias Luz East, might have been Shakespeare's Dark Lady, then she is indeed the Dark Lady and is me also. My exeat saith that I will dig and root about and trawl and query and wildly surmise until there is a place for you, Lucy, and it will be my place for having carved yours out and altogether earned by you for us and proved by me for us. Yes, I declare that beauty herself is black after all. My exeat saith that her black wires are where the world began, and all of it pouring out from atwixt her thighs, enough to make any man write that harder. Hallelujah. Exhibit A, thy black is fairest in my judgment's place. Exhibit B, and this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. Exhibit C, just like a black girl, how come you taste so good? My exeat saith that Lucy Negro is a seat
at the table, is my knowing that he knew it all after all, is the Black aesthetic writ large across a whitewashed riverside brick. So this is that poem is my ode to finding yourself in the places that didn't think that they left room for you, like the Declaration of Independence. Hey,
Yeah.
And it's also my ode to finding yourself in the places that didn't think they left room for you, and also my ode to finding your intersections. You know, from Shakespeare to Conrad's Heart of Darkness to fucking Mick Jagger. You know, like that all of it is there together, right? And we get to live in all like the liminality is the condition of poeming. So I think that to me is this poem's a very literal articulation of that truth, or exploration of that truth. So
Be a cheerleader for that. And Leatha already said that. Sarah, do you want us to stop?
Oh, well, I want to say cheers. First of all, to you all so much for your lovely work, and thank you for being here and reading and sharing. I'm so glad that I was able to hear. It's different to hear a poet read their work because you can really hear how it's meant to be read, you know? So thank you all so much for doing that. I have a couple of questions, if you all will stay with us for a little longer. And one, I hope we can put a positive spin on. I'm going to read it. It says, what poem would you point to as inspiration in these dark times? It could be a collection of poetry too. I know it's probably hard to pick one poem, but if you have any suggestions.
I'll say I've consistently been going back to César Vallejo's, his Poemas Humanos and Poemas en Prosa. And there's one in particular that begins in Spanish, and I'll then read it how it begins in English. Me viene hay días una gana ubérrima política. It hits me some days an overwhelming urge, a political desire, and then it goes on, to kiss the face of affection on both cheeks. And it hits me from far away, this demonstrative desire, this other desire to love by will or force whoever hates me, whoever rips his paper to shreds. And it goes on through a list of things about those things he wants to do. I want to help the good be just a little bit naughty. And it ends with this, it says, and in all things, I would like to be good to myself. It's a lovely poem, and Vallejo is one, at least that I consistently go back to. He sits with death and with suffering in ways that few others do, and he finds a way for that to be comforting. I don't know if anybody else has any other words.
I love Vallejo. Leatha, did you have, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, go. Yeah.
My poem, I'm going to see if I can do it from memory rather than Googling in the middle of a talk. But Lucille Clifton.
Oh, yes.
One, I would say, if you're a white person, any book by Jake Allen York, his whole book, any of it, because he's really reckons with how you navigate privilege, the truth of your past, and looking to the future, like really right-mindedly. But I would say as an individual poem, if I were ever going to get a tattoo, I'd get this whole thing on my body. I'm never going to get a tattoo because I'm afraid, but this poem is called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have made into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand
holding tight my other hand. Won't you celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed? That's my poem. Every day I yell it sometimes. Sometimes I'll yell it while I'm letting my dog out having coffee. I'm like, every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
I know that.
It's a real affirmation.
Oh, God. What, Leatha?
Poetry in general, I've just been reading, and I love Molly Peacock, and I love her poem Little Miracle, which is just this poem that I, have to keep. I can't recite it, and I want to show something, because when Caroline was talking about the Declaration of Independence, the book I've been reading is Tracy K. Smith's Wade in the Water. And she has the erasure poem of the Declaration, which is just so powerful and shows exactly what you were talking about what wasn't there from the very beginning. Taken captive on the high seas to bear is how it ends. And it's just an amazing showing of what's hidden inside the words that we think are one thing, and that hide something else. Yeah, really powerful.
I have to go back to the ones who trained me, Yates and Eliot and those, and Stevens. The power of words, the power of imagination, the confronting conflict, and with those great ideas that they brought forth. But because of a lame brain, I can't recite them at the moment.
I mean, Lucille's poem's about 4 lines. It's like, not that.
I met her a couple of times and wrote a poem about Lucille Clifton. She is truly a heroine. It's a shame to have lost her.
Oh, and Second Sermon on the Warpland by Gwendolyn Brooks.
That poem. I love that poem.
She says, salvage in the spin. Like, that's like use the salvaging of your life as a salve. And then she says, and then what does she say? Nevertheless live. She just says that over and over again. Nevertheless live. Just like that is, celebrate with me and nevertheless live. Like, just listen to the old Black ladies. They will get you through. I promise you. Like, that is.
Salvage. I will salvage.
Well, I've got, thank you all for sharing. I have one more question, I think, that is relevant to all of you. So Nana, I know you had illustrations that you had, I don't know if you commissioned them for your book or what, but
no, Gray Zeitz commissioned Joanne Price, and they're so wonderful. I'll just hold up this one. It's called The Turtle with Seven Eyes, but look at her wonderful wood engraving.
Well, I wanted to ask about art and music's influence in your work. I know, Caroline, your book was made into a play, and Jeremy, your book is illustrated, and I think that adds a whole nother level to poetry. And Leatha, you're published by Accents, and their books are all, artfully done. So if you could touch on that briefly, art and music's influence.
I'll just begin with praise of Gray Zeitz, who chooses handmade paper and sets every letter himself. And the wood engraving is all that he invites into his books. I've gone to his wood engraving classes and for 12 or 15 years, I think, as long as he's had them. And it's very difficult. So I admire the people who do it well. But it's handmade, it's hand produced from the thought to the page. And I admire him so much for that. Jeremy's wonderful affiliation with Annalise. I have to look at her. And Annalise Hermosillo.
Well, I mean, going all the way back to the Middle Ages and the Renaissance,
yes,
there are the 7 muses, and they're the sister arts, poetry and music and painting, they have always fed each other. And I think especially poetry that moves towards the image can't help but be inspired by painting. So that, I mean, in terms of that relationship, that's one. And I will, I mean, because I do want to. Annalisa did such a lovely job, and it was really a joy to be able to work with her on this and collaborate with her, and really kind of see how she decided to pull in both aspects of Central America and Central American life, as you can see in these scenes in the early part of the book, with the abuela sitting in her mountain home, and then the mother and child at the metate. But one of the things that she also did, and found ways in which these words would resonate. This is pen and ink and watercolor, but it's also newspaper collage. I don't know if you can see easily there, right? And so in terms of the newspaper words that she chose to collage, or like here you can see it on this map, these are actual news stories about the migrant caravan as they were moving up, and she used those to incorporate into the images that she was making.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Poetry is it's a layered art, I think. I mean, Molly, to talk about Molly Peacock just briefly again, she talks about it being kind of a fusion of three arts. I mean, you have image, which is the visual arts, and then you have the music of the language, and you have the rhythm of the line, so that you have the written literature as an art, but you also have within this, you know, music and visions, the images that are created in the mind. And I've been lucky enough each time that I've had a book, I've known an artist who who's made a cover for me. This latest one, and this is not going to show up really well. The painting is gorgeous. This is a painting by a local artist who's also has been in some of my poetry workshops, and I think that you had this, it's almost like I feel like poetry is a handmade thing. I write by hand, but I think you're always feeling like you're weaving all this stuff together somehow, and you're conscious of the music, and you're conscious of the image that captures what is some kind of essence in the book that you've just done. So I love trying to draw myself, but I love working with visual artists in particular. So I've really been lucky that I've been able to to collaborate with an artist. And the book I did with Larkspur, where Arwen Donahue sort of turned some of the
she's wonderful.
Zodiac. Yeah, and that was cool. Yeah. So
Caroline, we have to get you across the border up here so that you can meet some of our friends.
Yeah.
I grew up in the country with my grandparents outside Nashville when there were dirt roads. Rode my pony through Brentwood, which is now a total disaster. But Nashville is a different place from Louisville. They're so totally different, and from Lexington, and from, it's amazing how distinct they are.
It is.
Sarah, thank you so much for the work you did to put us together.
Well, thank you all for the work you did in writing your excellent books. It's a pleasure to hear from you and to learn more about your work. It's very special, and we're all so glad that you joined us tonight. Any final comments?
Caroline,
yeah, did you have anything to add, Caroline?
Yeah.
Oh, if we have do we have time? I don't want to.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I would say, I mean, it's funny to me. The cover of my book, I sort of came in. This is the second edition of Lucy Negro, but it's the one that they made when the Nashville Ballet turned the book into a ballet. And I said, they were like, "What are you visioning for the cover?" I was like, "Well, can you make a dancer's body out of words from the poem?"
Yes.
So I don't know if you can see, but it's one of the folks that worked at my publishing house sat down and wrote my poem out by hand, and then they sort of pieced the dancer together. But I think that's sort of like the most literal iteration of that intersection to me. To me, writing is so synesthetic. I have this stanza in Black Lucy Negro 2, and I say, "Lucy, the bend behind the word, the scent behind the sound, the skin rubbed raw behind the cry in the night," right? I think that there's something about, you just try and get all of the senses in there and you don't know which one is going to manifest itself in which way. Like, I feel the sights all the time. I taste emotions. I think that I live in a state of synesthesia all the time. And so when you try and write about that, it brings all of the arts to bear anyway. And I also think that there's the desire, when you talk about Molly Peacock, that is so true. But then I think, I don't know if I'm a lazy poet or a weird or too literal in my own way, but to me, when I'm trying to figure out how to put music in a poem, what I'm really trying to do is go, God, I really wish that I had Bessie Smith's voice, but I don't know that anyone's even going to read my poem out loud, but how do I make them feel the way I feel when I hear Bessie like sing a bent note or like moan into a word? And so then how do I put it on the page to create that feeling? And so it's almost like this like translated mimetic exercise of figuring out what a bent note looks like in words on a page. And so that's sort of always the work that I'm like fighting after or inquiring after when I'm writing poetry, is like how to give my reader the feeling from another art, but through the words on the page,
Well, Leatha and I were together when Komanyaka was reading his poems and speaking the same way you are, saying, "Look at this. This is my jazz. This is my music."
I mean, he
read it as jazz.
Emilio Fabro, as your boy Elliot would say.
So the missing book that they tossed into the Thames contains all the records from 1579 to 1597. It must have been it just amazing records of people in prison. And you think about Jeremy's people in cages, and all of us who've been in kind of feminine restraint for many years, and the country in a terrible hammerlock. It is prisons that really reverberate through the whole work, the manacles. And so I think probably we should end before Sarah kicks us out.
No, well, we're so enjoying it. It's been hard to even stop, but I do want to thank you all so much for being here and sharing your work again. And hopefully at some point we can do this in person. 2021, yes, Caroline, I cross my fingers with you. But yes, thanks again so much for being here. And I'll see you all in the pages of your books as I read them.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you all.
So lovely to share space with you all this evening.
Thank you.
Be with you, Caroline. Thank for all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well,
thanks again to the poets for being with us tonight, and thank you so much for joining us wherever you've been tuning in. When this closes, you'll see a short survey. It's 5 questions. If you could answer that just to give us feedback on this event, we'd really appreciate it. For any updates on the Kentucky Book Festival, including the speaker lineup and the schedule, find those on kyhumanities.org, and be sure to follow us at kyhumanities on social media. You can sign up for our newsletter at kyhumanities.org as well. We send that out about once a week and it includes a lot of great updates about our programs. Next week, join us for an author happy hour about reading with your kids with some wonderful authors and illustrators. Will Hillenbrand will lead the discussion with Jessica Young, Carmen Oliver, and Rita Lorraine Hubbard. We'll see you next Thursday at 7.